All right, well, welcome. My name is Megan Baker. I'm the Small Farms Extension Agent in Buncombe County, and I'm going to talk to you briefly today about how cover crops fit into small scale farms and micro scale farms. As the Small Farms Extension Agent in Buncombe County, I work with folks that produce a wide range of crops, everything from fruits and vegetables to medicinal herbs and cut flowers and a lot of alternative crops. And despite that variety and despite the variety of scale that those growers farm on, cover crops have a role to play on every farm. And so we're going to talk about some of the different ways to utilize these tools on hopefully your farm. Oh, hang on one second. Okay, so just a brief recap of some of the benefits of cover crops and why we're talking about this to begin with. They are such an important tool in overall soil health, whether that's preventing erosion or reducing kind of the impact of heavy rainfall that we have, conserving soil moisture. They just do a multitude of benefits. In the two pictures that you see here, you can also see the amount of biomass that they add. So biomass is an important way to build up organic matter for the soil. And it's also providing a ton of important habitat for beneficial insects and other predators, both above the soil and in the soil microbial communities underground. All of those organisms will help transform nutrients in the soil, whether that's actively moving nutrients from healthy cover crops that are growing in the soil, or those that have been terminated and are decomposing and releasing nutrients for cash crops. But they do a really great job of mining nutrients that some of our cash crops can't adequately utilize otherwise. And especially when we use a variety of different types of cover crops that we'll dive into. When you use a blend of cover crops, you're just maximizing all of these impacts and all of these potential benefits. So as farmers, we always are thinking about how to farm smarter and not harder. And one of the big pieces that we deal with is trying to minimize pest problems. So insects, diseases are something that we have to counteract every growing season. And cover crops play an important role for these as well. There are certain cover crops that by themselves alone, because of how they break down over time, they can minimize nematode problems. That's true with brassicas, that's true with ryegrass. And many of these, as I mentioned earlier, bring in other beneficial insects. And so when you have more predators and beneficial insects overall, that will give you some natural biocontrol and reduce the populations of your pest populations in the field. The cover crops are also really useful with some of our soil diseases that we deal with on a regular basis. When you have healthy soils and you have a diverse microbiome in the soil and in your fields, that leads to overall more disease suppression. And so when you have cover crops, or if you're dealing with a particular pest problem or disease issue in your field, think about what cover crops might be a good fit to help reduce those populations. There are many research tools out there that can cite specific reduced disease problems with things like Phytophthora and Rhizoctonia, which are disease issues that we see in almost every crop. Um, and as an example for ornamental production, crimson clover and triticale have been shown to reduce Phytophthora and Rhizoctonia issues. So that's one example of how you can utilize a blend of cover crops to help improve the disease occurrence that you see in your farm. So a few considerations that I want you to think about when you're looking at cover crops. Probably the hardest thing to manage is fitting cover crop time windows into your cash crop planting windows. So on most of our small farms, space is at the ultimate, we push it to the ultimate limit of being able to try to grow as much as we can and be as profitable as we can. And so a lot of times people feel like they have to choose between the cover crop and the cash crop. And what I want you to reconsider is thinking about the amount of benefit that cover crops bring as far as soil nutrition. Sometimes if you take a piece of your growing space and devote it to cover cropping, you're actually going to be increasing your yields overall because the nutrients that are transformed from the cover crops are more readily available to your cash crops. So when you are looking at your crop rotation window, think about what are the holes that you can fit in a cover crop planting. Even if it's a month or 6 weeks, there are some examples of things that you can plant in a quick turnaround scenario like that and still get some good benefit from. So I mentioned that cover crops can be really helpful for disease suppression. In some situations, they can also potentially create more of a problem with certain diseases or pest pressures. And we'll look at a few examples of that. So just be very diligent with the research that you do before you choose what crops to plant on your farm. And in general, once you start to dive into cover crops, it's probably familiar to you that we group them into different categories. Sometimes that's cool season and warm season categories. And other times you'll see categories looking at legumes versus grasses versus broadleaf species. And so we'll look at a few examples of those so that you'll have a better idea of what we're referencing. Buckwheat is one of our broadleaf cover crop species, and it is a true workhorse in small and micro farm scale settings. It's a very quick turnaround. So from seed to dropping seed and to maturity can happen in 70 to 90 days, depending on field conditions. What you can see in both of those images there is the amount of thick biomass that the buckwheat can create. It's also blooming in those images. And so you can see that those white flowers are drawing in beneficial insects. They're providing nectar to pollinators. And so that's one of the reasons that many people choose to bring buckwheat into their cropping systems. It's also very effective at drawing in phosphorus from the soil to the following cash crops. It can also get started pretty easily in really undernourished soils or degraded soils. And so it's one of the ones that I would say would be good to use. If you did have some flood damage from Helene, this might be one to think about going ahead and experimenting with. Because it can get started in pretty degraded soils very easily. One of the cautions I'll say with buckwheat, however, is that especially if you were experimenting with this in a high tunnel scenario or a low tunnel or a caterpillar tunnel scenario, because it is so dense, and you can control that to some degree with your seeding rates, sometimes you can have more issues with issues like botrytis, which is something that we can see be problematic in high tunnel settings. So just a word of caution there on buckwheat. And again, this is one of our broadleaf cover crops that we mentioned. Tillage radish is another broadleaf species, and you might know this as forage radish or daikon radish or oilseed radish. They can be edible. And they also, if you could hold that image on the left in your hand, you would see that that taproot is about 12 to 14 inches long. So if you've got adequate soil for them to reach that depth, you can imagine the amount of decreased compaction and increased drainage that those tillage radishes offer. The image that you see there on the right, after they have winter killed, those are huge pockets for nutrients and water and macroinvertebrates and soil microbes to take advantage of, as well as your following cash crop, being able to utilize those nice soil aggregates as growing space. So if you are dealing with poorly drained fields or compacted fields, tillage radish would be one that I would highly recommend. Two caveats to that. If you are looking to use them in a high tunnel scenario, typically we plant these in July or August, sometimes even September in our area. And in a high tunnel scenario where they're planted, they may not reach cool enough temperatures to winter kill. And so they might get a jump start growing again in the spring. And so that's something that you want to try to avoid. So if you have a high tunnel scenario and you have compacted soils, we'll look at a few different options for that scenario. Another thing to mention about tillage radishes is that typically, because their taproot is such a defined space, we typically want you to mix tillage radish in with other species, so a blend of cover crops, and that could be oats, peas, clover, or other types of grasses to kind of maximize your benefit from them. So legumes is another general category that we talk about with cover crops, and hairy vetch is one that you'll see mentioned again and again in lists and in the literature. All legumes are able to help bring nitrogen from the atmosphere down into the soil so that your cash crops can utilize that. And so hairy vetch is one that does a great job of capturing that nitrogen and improving soil. A few things to mention with that as well. If you let it go to seed, you will forever be dealing with hairy vetch as a weed issue. And so it's one of those that I would say, if you're new to cover cropping, perhaps don't start with hairy vetch because it can be a little tricky to manage and to prevent from becoming a weed problem. It can also be an alternative host for the root knot nematode. So while some cover crops, as I mentioned, rye and a lot of our brassicas are useful for suppressing nematodes, hairy vetch can be one that actually serves as a host and can be more problematic if you're dealing with nematode problems. So just pay attention to that caution as well. Where we do see hairy vetch utilized with success from growers is when it's paired with something like oats or rye in a blend. And so this is definitely one of the most common workhorse cover crops that we see recommended. Just know that it's got some cautions that come along with it. Clovers are another really beloved legume in the cover crop world. All of the clover species, including white clover, red clover, crimson, and many others, are able to capture nitrogen, just like the hairy vetch we just discussed. And because there's different varieties, you need to pay attention to kind of the pros and cons and the different sizes that the clover species get. So red clover and crimson clover, I have growers that utilize these as cover crops and also kind of tap them as part of their cash cropping system. We have a few flower growers that utilize crimson and red clover as filler for some of their cut flower bouquets. Something like white clover is much smaller and so is not a fit as a cash crop in that sense. But many of our white clovers, including some of the varieties that are actually mini clovers, so very low growing, are exceptional tools for seeding in walkways and row middles, or even along the edges of perennial crops, where they can continue to bring that nitrogen benefit and also draw in an enormous amount of beneficial insects. And that's true across all the clover species that are out there. We also have kind of this general term of grasses when we talk about cover crops, and that can include anything from the cereal rye that most of us are very familiar with, to oats and winter wheat, even a warm season cover like sorghum, Sudan grass. All of those are in the grass family and behave in similar ways in that they create a ton of biomass. And so again, if you're looking to kind of replenish depleted soils and increase your organic matter, grasses are a really good fit for that scenario. Because they have such high biomass above the soil line, that's also reflective of what happens in the soil. So their root systems can just be massive. And so they're really useful in breaking up compacted soil and mining other soil nutrients that might be further down in the soil profile than your cash crops can access. And because, again, they have such high biomass, they can also be really effective tools if you're dealing with a scenario where you might have salt buildup. We see this again and again with the high tunnel growing environment where perhaps you're using the same fertilizers and applying compost year after year. Perhaps you are really pushing year-round production in that high tunnel scenario. And all of those practices can lead to increased salts over the years. And grasses are a really good way if you do start to see some salt pressure or compacted soils in your high tunnels. Grasses play a really important role in helping to kind of mitigate those impacts and reset your soil. So again, we talked about how cover crops are grouped in different categories. And when you are new to cover crops, you first just want to think about what time of year am I going to be planting these? So if you think about it, is that over winter? Is that during the growing season? Perhaps between your spring and fall crops? Depending on what that window is, that will help make your decisions a little bit easier in choosing which cover crops to use. When you look at cover crops as well, particularly if you are thinking about you've got a really tight window, maybe you've just got 5-6 weeks between turnarounds or less, sometimes you can still use some of these species for just a shorter period of time. So the image that you see there on the right is sun hemp, and that's in a high tunnel scenario. That planting is about 3 weeks old. And sun hemp, for those of you that are not familiar with it, is a summer cover crop. It's known for just an enormous amount of biomass that it can create. And so if left unattended in the high tunnel, this plant would quickly be out of control and be very hard to terminate. But terminated in about another week, after about 4 weeks of growth, that can add a lot of biomass to the soil and give you a lot of nutrient benefits, even with that short window of time. So it's really important to kind of utilize these charts and tools about cover crops, and also know that you don't have to let every species go to full maturity to get the benefit out of it. We always get questions about what can I plant in certain windows of the season. So I just wanted to cover just a few options. We saw a lot of growers have very good results, even planting into November of last season after Hurricane Helene, with things like cereal rye, oats, frost-seeded red clover, winter peas. All of those are really good options for kind of overwintering blends in the field or in the high tunnel. And this time of year, we've got folks that are planting oats and rye and clovers to try to get a jump start before perhaps their summer crops go in the ground. In the summertime, as I mentioned, buckwheat is one that you'll hear recommended again and again. A lot of folks like cowpeas as well in a blended mix. They too are a legume, and so can help with that nitrogen fixing. And then depending on the growing environment, again, what kind of space you have, things like millet and sun hemp, as we just saw, sorghum, Sudan grass, all of those, if you leave them for a long period of time, can create a lot of biomass and be really good tools for building up organic matter over the summer. And then one last thing to note is that even if you've got things in your high tunnel or in the field that are late season cash crops, such as tomatoes or peppers, you can still think about interseeding towards the late summer with something like a rye or a radish blend. And still, while you're able to continue harvesting, you can go ahead and give some time for those cover crops to go ahead and get some growth started before the winter. Okay, so when we talk about cover crops, it's important to note that, especially on a small scale, we're not talking about huge quantities of seed. If we're looking at a farm, a field scale where we're looking at per acre rates, it varies on the species, but sometimes we're looking at 40 pounds, 50 pounds, 60 pounds to an acre. But on a smaller scale, that translates into literally ounces of seed per 100 square feet. So if you're just doing a straight blend of buckwheat, you would just follow the seeding rates that are recommended for that particular crop. But if you are looking at doing a blend of cover crop seeds, the rule of thumb is to just know that you're going to need whatever that ratio that you're planting. If you're doing buckwheat and rye as an example, you're going to reduce those seeding rates by half if you're doing a combination. Otherwise, you can run into issues with too much overcrowding and potential botrytis issues. You'll also notice that if you are doing a blend, it's important to note that some species germinate quicker than others. Clover is one that we see that just takes a little bit longer than other species. And so if you've got a really fast germinating or a really highly competitive cover crop, forage radish is one, oats, canola, sorghum, Sudan grass, all of those germinate much more readily. And so you might want to adjust that seeding rate for those species so that your other species can also grow well and proliferate in the field. So when we talk about cover crops, we often, the first question to think about is, how are you going to terminate that cover crop? Whether you're in a field scenario or in a high tunnel, your job with cover crops is to plan out what you're going to grow that, and then terminate that so that you can get that biomass back into the soil and utilize all the benefits from that cover crop. So maybe you're lucky and you're farming on a larger scale and you've got a tractor, or maybe you have a push behind, walk behind BCS tractor. Those types of equipment, typically you can source what's called a roller crimper. And that image that you see with the tractor with the chevron pattern, basically as that rolls over cover crop, it breaks the stem and disrupts the vascular system, leading to the death of that cover crop, which is actually what you want. Because remember, you've got cash crops that need to get into the ground. So if you don't have a roller crimper, and they're different sizes depending on the different types of equipment you're dealing with, I just wanted to mention some other effective termination ways that small growers use. The weed whacker, the weed eater in a field setting can be really effective. I have a grower that uses an electric hedge trimmer in her high tunnel setting. And she prefers that over the weed whacker because it doesn't throw the plant material all over the place quite as much. So you can be kind of creative with some of the existing tools that you already have. I have another grower that grows on a very small scale with her raised beds. And instead of using a roller crimper, she uses literally a 2x4 board, and that is fixed with a string. And if you look in the upper right, you'll see part of what I'm describing there. That essentially is a board that she steps on to break the stem of her cover crops, thereby slowly killing that plant material. And she does that and then covers her rows with silage tarp. And that is kind of a two-step process to initially kill the cover crop. And then that silage tarp allows it to decompose and break down into the soil very readily. You can also use push mowers. Ryegrass and clovers oftentimes can be terminated that way. Not all cover crops are easily terminated with push mowers, and especially if they're left to reach their maximum maturity, that can be pretty hard and they might grow back. So you want to think about and do your research about how easily it is to terminate certain cover crops before you plant them. What goes along with termination is also thinking about how much time you need for those cover crop residues to decompose so that they don't interfere with the growth of your cash crop. Whether you're crimping your material or terminating it in some other way, you need to give that crop residue time to decompose before you plant into it. If you don't, it can tie up soil nutrients that will kind of rob your plants from being able to access. And you might see yellowing, you might see some other nutritional problems develop. So depending on the time of year, you're going to wait a few weeks. In summertime, when we've got temperatures that are warmer, decomposition rates are higher, you might only need 2 to 3 weeks between terminating your crop and actually planting it into that residue. In the wintertime, obviously temperatures are lower, and so that can take more time. One of the other factors that's really key for decomposition and increasing that is making sure that you've got adequate, excuse me, adequate soil moisture. So the drier the soil, the longer decomposition is going to take. So these are all things that you can kind of factor into your operation. Many of the growers that I work with do love using silage tarps because they kind of heat up that soil. You can also use clear plastic to kind of aid in the decomposition of the crop residues. And some amount of crop residues are fine to plant into. They can kind of create a mulch and protect those young seedlings, but there's a balance there. Too much can be problematic. I also wanted to mention just a few cautions with cover crops. Probably the biggest caution is make sure that you're on top of terminating it at the proper maturity level. So any cover crop, once it goes to seed, can then become a nightmare weed problem. And so there are so many benefits of cover crops. We want you to ensure that you hedge your bets and that does not become a situation for your farm. So pay attention when those crops are flowering. That's when you need to already have in place your plan to terminate that. The example that you see on the right, that mustard was in a high tunnel scenario. The grower did initially just take her hedge trimmer and cut that back. I believe that was towards the end of June when she cut it back. It regrew. And then she was able to fully terminate it in September before planting her fall flower crop. So different scenarios and different timing, but it is really important to make sure that, especially in a high tunnel scenario, that those things don't go to seed. When you leave cover crops to full maturity before you terminate them, many of those species, especially a lot of the grasses, with that high biomass, they can also become more carbon rich. And so that plant material is just more dense and it will take a lot longer to decompose. And so again, depending on your timing window, you want to make sure that you're terminating it at the time that fits into your cropping schedule. Just a few cautions as well. If you are doing cover crops in a high tunnel, obviously there's a lot of things that you want to avoid damaging. You don't want to interrupt, you don't want to rip your plastic, you don't want to cut into your irrigation system. You might have to remove some of your walkway metals depending upon your termination method. So all of these are things to just think through before you plant seed into the ground. And I do want to mention too that there's a lot of in-person learning experiences that happen on small farms with cover crops. The image that you see there with the white flowers is a cover crop called alyssum. That is not one that we see a lot of folks use. It was used with great success this past summer on a flower farm with dahlias. She just hand broadcasted the seed initially, but her seeding rate was way too high. And so this was her first season planting this crop. She ran into some issues with it last year being a little bit too aggressive and almost outcompeting some of her cash crops. And so there's always learning lessons that will happen in the growing season. And so you starting out in year one with cover crops will learn many lessons that will serve you in your later seasons with them. So again, just to recap all of the benefits that cover crops have, they have a place on every farm of every size, whether that's just a growing bed, where you're looking to increase nutrient accessibility, or if you're dealing with situations like many of our farms right now, where following massive flooding, we're dealing with rebuilding soil. So we're looking at how to improve soil texture, how to build up biomass, perhaps how to deal with increased pest pressure, that the pests that got moved around and disease pressures that got moved around in the floods. So if you start to see issues on your farm, or you already know you have known issues, it's worth giving a call to your local extension agent and having a conversation about your unique scenario. There's a lot of resources online, and a few that I do want to mention specifically. SARE, which is the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, that organization has some amazing cover crop resources that are by far the go-to. Extension folks like myself readily utilize their decades of research to make good decisions for local farmers. We also have a lot of information through our extension cover crop website. So if you Google NC State Extension cover crops, you'll come to this landing page and be able to dive in quite a bit. And then I have worked with a lot of farmers with a decision tool, specifically looking at cover crops. The cover crop selector org website that you see right there will take you to an interactive decision tool where you can actually tell this tool that you're in North Carolina. You can hone in on your specific farm. You can tell it the crop parameters and the timing parameters that you're trying to plant a cover crop in, and it'll populate a list of potential cover crops that you can use. So there's lots of tools out there, and there's lots of resources through your local extension office that you can take advantage of. So with that, I just want to say thank you. And if you have other questions about cover crops for small or micro-sized farms, feel free to reach out at the email address that you see there.